and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before you on.
I'm gonna click on it. Are you attending again? I know. I just loaded you a panelist.
There we are. Nice smile, Al. We're not flustered. Okay, are we ready?
Yes, sir.
In accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act, public meetings may be held in person or by means of communication equipment, including streaming services and other online meeting platforms. NJSA 10:4-8B. Due to the COVID-19 situation, the Borough of Fairhaven's municipal facilities are closed to the public. This meeting is being presented through the Zoom meeting platform and being broadcast from Borough Hall, 748 River Road, Fairhaven, New Jersey. Public participation for this council meeting of May 26, 2020 is available by call-in phone number or through web conference Zoom. Members of the public will be on mute until public question comment time, which will be announced. At that time, the public has the opportunity to question or comment by phone or through Zoom by the raise hand button and will be called on at the appropriate time. Notice of this meeting was included in the scheduled meeting sent to the Asbury Park Press, the Two River Times, the Hub, and the Star Ledger on January 9th, 2020, posted on the Borough website, the bulletin board in the municipal building, and has remained to be posted as required under the statute. Allison, roll call, please.
Council members Banahan,
You're on mute.
He's on mute.
I'm here.
Christner Keefe,
Here.
Koch,
Here.
McHugh,
Here.
Rodriguez,
Present.
and Sorensen.
Here.
Next, we have a proclamation thanking those on the front lines. Whereas in December of 2019, the novel coronavirus outbreak began in Wuhan, China, and since then has touched almost every corner of the world and has shuttered villages, towns, cities, and healthcare facilities. And whereas hundreds of thousands of people around the world have become sickened and many have died due to this outbreak. And whereas the novel coronavirus is also known as COVID-19, CO stands for Corona, 6 for virus, and D for disease. And whereas the first case of COVID-19 hit the United States in February 2020, and since then has been transmitted through the country, leaving thousands of front lines to combat this virus by working long hours as they assist those in need in our communities. And whereas around the country, millions of healthcare professionals, first responders, warehouse operators, truck drivers, postal workers, delivery workers, construction workers, grocery store clerks, gas station attendants, and public servants are fighting this pandemic and helping to ensure the health, well-being, and safety of the citizens of the Borough of Fairhaven, County of Monmouth, the state of New Jersey, and the United States of America. And whereas these individuals on the front line are heroes because of their enduring and selfless dedication to their fellow citizens as they continue to work in the dangerous conditions, particularly healthcare workers experiencing a short supply of protective gear. And whereas the country is at war with this pandemic, and great people that the Americans rely on in this time are unmatched in any and all regards. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Mayor and Council of the Borough of Fairhaven extend its sincere gratitude to all these heroes who continue to sacrifice for the sake of the residents of the Borough of Fairhaven and the country. Be it further resolved that Mayor Lucarelli and the Borough Council extend a personal thank you to every frontline worker and are grateful for everything that they are doing for our citizens, and call on all residents of the Borough of Fairhaven, residents of Monmouth County, residents of the state of New Jersey, and across the country to extend their gratitude for every frontline worker risking their personal health and the health of those who they love. We are forever grateful for everything. Thank you, these heroes. Thank you for everything you do. Okay.
Thank you.
There we are. And I think, you know, we have 25 cases in Fairhaven. Chief, I think we're down to 8 active. We were at 24 for a very long period of time, and our most recent case was a frontline worker, was a nurse. So it is, the risk is real, and we thank them. Next up, workshop session, lawn signs, request from Holy Cross and Rumson Country Day 8th graduations. Does anybody have any questions on this?
Nope.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Request of a banner from Rumson Fairhaven Regional High School. Everybody saw this? May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Move in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Fair share housing settlement timeline and ordinance overview. We have with us as participants, Susan Gruhl of Higher Gruhl, our planner, our planning board chair and committee member of the Fair Share Housing Committee, Todd Lair, and committee member and planning board member, Mike Borneo. Susan, Todd, and Mike, thank you for joining us. And I believe we're here to go to a letter from Mike Edwards in regards to our path forward. So I guess Susan or Teresa, could either one of you?
Mayor, I'll start it off, and I'll turn it over to Susan, and certainly the balance of the committee that can weigh in. Governing body members were given a packet of information. It started with a memo from our special Fair Housing Council, Mike Edwards' office. The borough did participate in a settlement agreement with the courts on May 20th, and the court judge put the borough on a very strict timeline to have an ordinance in place the settlement agreement. And for that reason, after consulting with the Fair Share Housing Committee members last Friday, we determined that it would be best to at least have an overview of the timeline and the ordinance tonight with the governing body, with an eye on introducing the ordinance on June 8th. As you know, we don't generally introduce an ordinance the same night we see it for the first time. So we're going to go over it tonight with the governing body members, get input from the governing body members in the committee, and also then turn around and finalize that and get it back to the governing body, hopefully for a June 8th introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Susan Gruhl now from Higher and Gruhl and Associates to take us through the timeline and the draft ordinance. Allison is going to share the documents on the screen as Susan references them. And then we can open it up to the committee members and the governing body members for questions and comments.
Can I make one statement before we kick off?
Yes, sir.
So just for the education of the public, there's only one ordinance that we're considering there tonight to introduce. There are many ordinances that need to be written. We are on a tight time frame to a certain degree, but there are prescriptive time frames that Susan will go through. So there's many time frames and many ordinances. I just don't want people to think we're done after tonight. Actually, this is the first step in a pretty long journey to codify and deliberate over different aspects of how we implement the fair share housing plan within our town. And it's this is not in any way a rush job, but rather we're just complying with what the court wants. There's been in the past some concern that we're rushing things. There will be many opportunities across many ordinances for the public to hear and chime in on.
Susan, do you want to take it now? Take yourself off of mute.
Susan, we need you on mute.
Susan, you're on mute. Can we unmute her?
I'm unmuting
You're
you.
on mute.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so with the timeline, we'll start with the timeline and just pick up on the good news. The good news is, as Teresa said, we had the fairness hearing, which is the first of two steps within the court. Fairness hearing, which the court has to determine whether the settlement agreements with M&M and Fair Share are fair and reasonable and protect the interests of low and moderate income households. Okay? The court determined, in fact, yes, both settlement agreements did that. And that is a huge, huge positive, upbeat kind of thing for the borough as it relates to affordable housing. Once that is determined, the courts give a certain time frame. Generally, and we'll get into, there are a couple of glitches or a couple of different variations, but 120 days to actually implement the ordinances and resolutions to effectuate the settlement agreement and the housing plan. Okay, the settlement agreements and the housing plan. And the court determined that the compliance hearing, which is the ultimate hearing in front of the court to determine whether in fact the borough did everything that they were to do in terms of ordinances and resolutions to implement the settlement agreements, is scheduled right now for October, I think it's 23rd. It's on that. It has to be on file 30 days before. And within that time frame, the end of September, from now to the end of September, there's a lot that has to be done, but it will be reasoned and we will get as much input. And there is as Chris said, there is substantial, sufficient time and opportunities for the public to participate as they do with any ordinances. The fast track piece to this is the M&M ordinance. The court determined that that needed to be fast tracked. And I have good news for everyone, and it's a little variation on the theme that we talked with the subcommittee for, is we had initially thought that the ordinance for M&M had to be adopted within 30 days, and that would have had to be the end of June. It is now understood that, and the order from the court says, everybody agreeing, that the ordinance has to be introduced by the end of June, not adopted. And for all of you, that is quite a difference. So that's where you'll see that we've kind of put some dates in there. Tap to speak. Okay, your microphone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so there is, the M&M ordinance is fast forward, okay? It's not bundled with all the other ordinances that have to be done through the overlay district and other ordinances, okay? So we are focused right now on the M&M ordinance. But we wanted to give you a list and a timeline to the best that we could. We didn't fill in all the dates, but at least for you to understand the type of activities that have to occur within this 120 days. There's another provision that requires the memo of agreement or understanding with Habitat to be executed. Actually, there's a little variation of that too. We have 60 days. It's at the time that the council adopts the M&M ordinance. Okay, but that's about the same time frame. That should not be an issue. So what we have tried to do, again, is focus. So the good news is you're moving in the right direction and the court agrees. The next step is to focus on the M&M zoning. And based upon our conversation with the subcommittee, we determined, and this certainly is just the framework for the ordinance, not the ordinance per se, but we put together a chart. Let's see, there's a comparison chart that shows what the existing zoning is in the B1 and what the proposed bulk standards, these are the bulk standards, in the proposed new M&M or affordable housing zone, just to kind of give you a sense of comparison. In addition, you'll see on the screen, there was a concept plan that was attached to the settlement agreement with M&M. And so we had certain guidelines that were in that settlement agreement that we had to place in the ordinance. So that was the one piece that we thought would be helpful in terms of showing what the distinctions are. And you'll see that as much as there are differences, it is very similar to what is permitted in the B1 zone now. For example, the maximum height in the B1 is 35 feet and 2.5 stories. What's proposed and what's in the settlement agreement is 38 feet and 3 stories. However, there is this is part of the settlement agreement, an offset, a 10-foot offset is required on the 3rd floor to mitigate the visual impact, okay? There are, again, you can see that, and certainly that's something that we will be using for guidance. One of the other, and this is an overview. I don't want to put you all to sleep, and you'll be seeing the actual ordinance at a subsequent time. We also, and this was a suggestion of the subcommittee, which we thought was really good, is to look at the existing ordinance and make sure that we knew all of the sections that may or may not need to be amended for this site, or remains the standards in it are appropriate for this site. So you'll see that in the other, Allison, is that up? It says proposed site plan standards design guidelines.
No, let me see where we are. There you go.
Okay. We went through every section of the ordinance as it relates to site plan, and we identified what sections may or may not need to be amended. For example, some of it's just self-explanatory, but one of the ones is home occupation. You have a section on home occupation, and you permit it based upon certain standards. We don't recommend, but you as a policy board must determine whether you want to permit home occupations in this particular development. We also looked signage, and you have some very broad sign standards that we would suggest modeling it specifically to this development. We don't recommend, of course, this again is a policy decision. We would suggest no freestanding signs. We suggest no window signs. And we suggest that the signs that the size of the signs that you currently permit in your B1 zone may be too large. They may be more appropriate to use your signage standards that you have in your historic commercial district. Again, we have a lot of we list fences, walls, obviously buffering and landscaping, very important in terms of addressing and buffering the sides of we also suggest and recommend light poles. You permit 25-foot height for light poles. We suggest reducing that. And the parking setbacks and number of spaces are probably, well, they do need to be revised to reflect the settlement agreement and the concept plan. You will see that for the residential units, that the concept plan has tandem parking permitted, 2 spaces per unit tandem. So that was something that we have to provide for.
Can you just explain what that means? I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yes, it's back-to-back. You'll look at the concept plan and you'll see 2 parking spaces back-to-back or nose-to-nose, whatever. But those are only permitted. In other words, those 2 would be assigned to 1 unit, and they would have, the owners or the renters would have control over those 2 spaces. So if somebody is stuck in the internal space, they could then move their car and get, because they have control over the car that's blocking them in as such. It is used, it's okay if those 2 tandem spaces are associated with 1 unit. Where it gets a little dicey, and we've never suggested using tandem when you have, say, 2 units sharing those spaces. Then it gets a little dicey. Does that help?
Perfect.
We started looking at some additional standards. These are certainly not all-inclusive, and we still need a lot to do with the ordinance, but we kind of wanted to give you a feel. Obviously, the Cedar building facade and the River Road building facade are both very important and should be treated as front facades, both of them. We also recommend that bike racks be provided, and that there be a visually prominent corner element, architectural element, and a commercial entrance be permitted on the corner or be required on the corner. We also recommend that public outdoor seating and patios be provided, and that from a material, obviously we're somewhat limited with what we can do, or what the ordinance can do in terms of design, particularly materials and architectural details, because it's not in a historic district. But we suggest durable materials, brick, stone, cement board, but no EIFS. And anyone that knows anything about that, that's a very, has issues as a building material, and a facade. Also, the front facade along River Road is approximately 140 some feet. That's a long facade. We don't want it to be, to look massive. And so what we're suggesting is breakup. Maybe in the facade should be broken up into 3 or more bays as such, both with vertical and horizontal elements that break that scale up. And these are just some of our initial thoughts. But we wanted to give you, at the time when we spoke with the subcommittee, we thought that we were on this fast track where the council was looking at introducing something on June 8th. We have a little bit of a reprieve now, a bit, so that, but we're working on it, as you see. Any thoughts, any questions that you would have, and any thoughts and considerations that you would have at this point would be greatly It would really be helpful. And we also would just say that the Housing Subcommittee has been very helpful, and we anticipate that we will be working with them to refine the ordinance prior to the council getting a full ordinance. I hope I've given you an overview, not too much, not too little. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. I kind of look at Todd and perhaps Mike Borneo at this point to see if either you gentlemen have any questions, or we're all ready to roll up our sleeves and move ahead with these proposed ordinances.
I have a couple of comments. I just put them out there. The lists that were prepared by Hiram Gould should be delivered to Rich. I think it's important that he take a look at this. Rich is the one that's most familiar with reviewing site plans, and I think that he's the one that's most likely to be sure that we've got a complete list of things. And I think it's important that when we present this, that everybody understand what our existing standards are and where we've deviated. And I also think that we should, similar to the way a zoning board or planning board would look at granting a variance, I think we should be looking at things to soften up areas where this building won't be in compliance with what the current rules were. You can do things with regard to softening the front, landscaping, and other things related to your setback deviation that's being permitted in order to make this work on this site. I noticed, Susan, just a couple of comments with regard to the list. There was a setback referenced at 13 feet. The secondary setback off the Cedar was very important. It drops back again to 16, so I just don't want to lose sight of that. I know that was just a basic list to get us started. I noticed that habitable floor area wasn't referenced. I'm not sure why, but we should look at that. I don't know about outdoor seating. I think we can talk about this more in the committee. This is a really tight space, and you've got a very limited amount of space between the building and River Road. I don't think that there's enough space for tables. It's tight in the rear too with regard to parking. So while I know that outdoor seating is something that's received a lot of enthusiastic response from the public, I'm not sure where it will go here. And I think we should think
But
about
I
it.
think we talked about the corner piece, and that's probably the most appropriate place for, but we'll look, but a patio or an outdoor seating.
Yeah, let's look at it. Let's make sure nobody's going to lean back and wind up in River Road. But if there's room, I do think people like it. There are trees on the east side, big trees, and I noticed that area is supposed to be landscaped. I don't know whether or not there's a way to try and make sure that those trees are protected, but I think we should look at it. And then my last comment ties back to Rich. There's going to be drainage issues here. This whole site's been paved for as long as any of us can remember, not quite 50 years for me. So I know that we've gotten used to it all being asphalt, but anything that we can do to improve the drainage situation, I think we should be looking to do that.
Okay. Very good. All right. I think that so concludes it. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. I'd like to thank Todd and Mike Borneo, the rest of the Fair Share Housing Committee, for all their efforts. And we have a tremendous amount of work ahead of us to get this going. And I'd say so far, so good. We'll now move on to our next item on the agenda, public comment on agenda items. May I have a motion to open?
Motion to open.
Second.
Okay, we are now open to the public. Teresa will be indicating or bringing people in. So members of the public, if you'd like to speak or be heard about anything on an agenda item, please use the raise your hand button and you will be acknowledged and ask your question or comment. We have Mike McHugh, but we'll give everybody a moment to see if they can find the button. TC.
Okay.
Okay. We don't know who TC is. TC, you are muted. TC, please speak, identify yourself, and state your address for the record.
Hi, it's Tracy Cole. I live at 123 Grange Ave. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
I wanted to know if council has the right or the authority to revisit the bulk standards that were part of the initial overlay district for the affordable housing plan.
I'll look to either Sal or Susan Gruhl for that answer. Susan?
We haven't completed actually, there are very few bulk standards that are related to the overlay zone at this point. There is a density, there is the area, but in terms of the setbacks and such, we have not gotten to that level of detail.
And that will happen in the work of the committee?
Yes.
Okay.
But not this, Tracy, just to make sure, to clarify, the M&M ordinance is fast-tracked. And again, that's something that has to be that should be introduced by the end of June. The remaining ordinances, what you're talking about, the overlay ordinances, will be put together somewhere between now and August, I would say. But we have not started to frame that out yet in terms of the standard. Other than there are certain density standards and certain height standards. But other than that, I don't believe there's any other detailed standards.
Okay, so that the setback and the length of the site and those things, there's some flexibility in that for the borough to decide?
Yes, as long as it doesn't significantly limit the standards that are in the settlement agreement.
Tracy, we're really backing into the bulk standards. So what we have is a legal obligation to provide a realistic opportunity for affordable housing. And the exercise that we've gone through on the M&M site is essentially to take the direction that was put into the affordable housing plan, which was to soften the increase in ridge height, to increase ridge height from 35 to 38, to make a third floor feasible, soften it by pushing the third story back. That was the offset. There's a recognition that we're going to have some trouble with parking. There was a desire to keep commercial on the first floor to maintain the commercial character of our downtown area. And so for the first bit of this, we're going to be looking at it with M&M. We know there's setbacks and whatnot because that's all been part of a discussion. But now we need to try and look at that across. It's a harder job. We need to look at it across the balance of the business district to see how it would apply or how it's going to work interchangeably in order to permit the density that the court has approved, that we very carefully tried to work towards so that we could gain approval without permitting density that would substantially change the character of the commercial district.
Understood. It's a lot of work. I appreciate all the time and effort everyone's putting into it. Thank you for answering my question. Thank you.
Mayor, you're on mute.
You have another.
Jillian Hoagland,
I will.
if I'm saying that correctly. Good evening, Jillian.
She's still
She's on
mute.
mute. She's on mute.
There we go. Hi, guys. To that point about density, have you done a traffic plan and kind of figured out what you're going to do with our WEM area between the 8 to 10 or Lord knows how many houses that are going to go in back where the DPW is, and then the 2-family in this non-2-family area, and the brush grinding. Like, how are we, as a very small community, this little WHAM community, have you looked at how that influx of houses and cars, and presumably 2 cars per household, will affect our area?
Traditionally, as you, I'm sure you know, that is normally something that is done at site plan approval. What we are talking about for this, specifically for affordable housing, is the 2-family habitat site.
Right. My concern is that you can't look at it in piecemeal. This whole area is in flux, right? So you're going to have that, which is certainly out of place, and I've expressed that in no uncertain terms. And you're going to have, you guys won't disclose anymore, but we were under the impression where the DPW is, plus you still have the DPW there, it's just smaller, and all those trucks, plus you have the brush grinding area, which I guess we'll get to at some point in this meeting. So my question is it responsible to just be looking at this in a silo, or shouldn't we be looking at it holistically?
I think that when if I may speak to that as the borough planner and the borough affordable housing planner, it was very clear, and probably more so than a lot of other communities, that the borough, including the planning board, the subcommittee, and the council, were very, very sensitive to the character of neighborhoods, and where, in fact, there would be opportunities to introduce and address the affordable housing obligation, and yet at the same time not overwhelm neighborhoods.
Right, so that's not per se overwhelming it, but it's happening concurrently with what's going on at the DPW. So I'll restate it. You can't really look at it as a silo. You have to look at it holistically. You're talking about, let's say, 8 to 10 times, houses times 2, so that cars, so 16 to 20 cars, plus the habitats, you're looking at 4 cars there, plus all the trucks, plus the brush grinding. It just kind of looks like you guys were kind of, up against something, and you found this, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel like you really took a look at it, but in a 360-degree way. And I know you had deadlines, and I appreciate that, and I understand the ramifications of not dealing with it, but it's concerning to me that you guys won't speak to what's going on at the DPW. I just don't understand. There's no silos here. It all happens together. It's all one small area inundated with all of this simultaneously.
Can I just jump in? I just want it to be understood that the accommodation of affordable housing is being viewed by everybody working on this as an adjustment to what the existing zoning permits. Every piece of property in town has certain things that you're permitted to do with it as a matter of right. And the areas that are currently undeveloped or underutilized, but you're entitled to develop those parcels in accordance with the ordinances in ways that could negatively affect traffic, but that are part of an overall design for the town of Fairhaven that's been in place for decades and decades and decades. So as we evaluate the 2-family on a single-family lot, and as we evaluate 14 apartments on the Sunoco site, the analysis that was done, and we're still doing, is comparing how the changes to accommodate the affordable housing that we need to do as a matter of law can be viewed in comparison to what's currently permitted.
Understood, Todd, but we still have the houses that are going to go up on Allen.
I'll jump in here. There's been no decision made on any houses on Allen at this juncture. The governing body, as part of their overall facilities plan, looked at the possibility of utilizing the sale of properties to offset some of those costs, but those decisions have not been made at this juncture.
But they are being entertained. So this just kind of feels a little bit like, well, let's just do this now and then we'll deal with that later, which is easy for you guys to say, but not so easy for the people who live here. When, you know, you're talking about a massive influx of cars and homes, you know, to an area, again, that's already inundated with trucks and brush grinding and 18-wheelers. All I'm saying to you is I caution you not to sink this area. I implore you to look at it holistically with what you have to do to satisfy the courts so the town doesn't get sued, if that's the way that you want to go, and also to look at this, what might happen 1, 2, or 3 years down the line.
Can I just chime in for a second? Jillian, I just want to say thanks for your comments and your feedback. You know, I get the sense that you're speaking not just on behalf of yourself, but several of your neighbors, or many of them. You know, if I was not an elected official at the time that fair share housing became a concern in, gosh, was it early 19? I believe it was, and things needed to slow down. All the other decisions in town needed to slow down, and that became a priority. So decisions did not continue to be made, and you know, that became the priority and the focus. And at this point, from my perspective at least, decisions are being made one at a time. You can't make one without considering its impact on the surrounding neighborhood and all the other pieces together. And then we have to look at, you know, neighborhoods and then the town as a whole. So I hear what you're saying, and I do think that the governing body takes each of these elements on their own very seriously. You know, I know that there are concerns about brush grinding, and I know that those concerns go back quite a number of years. I know that there are questions about what needs to happen to address our facility needs at DPW and what's going to happen to that property, whether or not properties there will be sold off or not, and more residential homes put up. That's a question. And again, how affordable housing impacts the answer. And that there has been an illusion about these moving pieces. But at least as far as I'm aware, you know, these decisions have yet to be made.
Understood. And I understand that aspect of it. I just think if there's any way that we can go back and look at everything that is currently in this little section and is hoping / planning to be in this section before any final decisions are made. You know, I mean, our neighbors want to flee this area. It's bananas, and it's not good for the town. And it's just, you know, and not just because of the 2-family house, because of everything, because of the pollution from the brush and the fire hazard from the brush grinding area, because of the 18-wheelers that, you know, once a week take my curb and could very easily knock my son down. Like, you know, it's an area that's just feels like it's got a lot going on. And I want to really urge you guys to understand, you know, the landscape of what's going on here before you just try to, it seems a little slapshot, I have to be honest. And it feels that way to our neighbors as well, to the community.
Well, Jillian, I thank you for that. I do take exception with you binding together the Fair Share Housing Plan at the Sunoco site, the DPW, and the Brush site.
Not the Sunoco. I'm only talking about our area.
Okay. You know, I believe that, you know, or I understand you have an issue with the Brush site, and we'll get to that later in the meeting of what we're doing with it. But your representation of how we're evolving with this, I believe, is unfair. Instead of looking at it and calling it silos, I think what you should look at this is building blocks. And as each piece is put into place, consideration is given for all the other pieces and the impact that it does have.
And you're cool with having 20, let's say on the low end, 16 more cars in the span of one street? That's
Jillian,
that's not a public safety hazard.
Jillian, I take exception to your interruptions, but
I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
Jillian, as I said, it'll be coming in as building blocks, and each component will be examined to see how it fits. Everything that the borough does, it does with professionals, with land use attorneys. It does it with planners. We have an excellent planning board, a tremendous amount of talent on our planning board, and all these things are considered as we move forward. So I believe from your Facebook posts and some of the other things that you've done, we understand that you have an issue with the brush site, and as I said, we will get to that later. Do you have any other comments on agenda items?
No, I didn't realize I was interrupting you. I thought you were done. Firstly. Secondly, it's just so you know, I'm here representing my neighborhood. It's not just me.
No, we gathered that.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments on agenda items?
Ben, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I don't see any hands up at the moment. I had an additional question for Susan with respect to fair share.
Sure.
I just want to clarify for my own purposes, the documents that you shared and that I received earlier today, some of them relate to the entire affordable housing zone and some of them relate only to the M&M site. Is that accurate?
No, the intent is only to, at this point, address the M&M zone. Now, that being said, potentially some of the standards that we come up through this M&M zone exercise may be appropriate to include in some of the overlay standards as well. But at this point in time, we are really focused on what the M&M site is, both the bulk standards and some of these other standards that we've identified as it relates to your existing ordinance.
Okay. And so the requirements of the court at this time are strictly related to that?
No, the requirements of the court are to fast track, I'll use that term, fast track the ordinance, the zoning ordinance standards for the M&M site prior to having to address the other sites, the overlay sites, as we call them, that are mostly in the B1 zone, but in other parts of the B1 zone. That will come. That will be part of the next phase of what we have to do.
Okay.
I hope that clarifies it a bit.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
Ben, you're on mute. Mayor, you're on mute.
Teresa, please click on neighbor, and neighbor, please identify yourself. Hello, neighbor.
I don't know if this is me, whose turn it is to talk.
It is.
Okay. This is Diane Mavora, 83 Navasink Avenue. And pertaining to the M&M parcel, I still am pretty strong-willed at it being more like the house to the left, and it not having a commercial space on the bottom, and it being more like a front porch type of building that's to the left of it. I feel as though this is important because to the right, across Cedar Street, is a building that also looks like a house. So I think making the bottom part retail, which in this day and age we are finding might be less and less, it would be more coherent with the way the neighborhood looks at this time. And that's my comment.
Todd, could you address that concern, please?
I didn't hear what you said.
I'm asking Todd to address your point of view on the M&M site and the requirement of commercial.
Let me see how best to kind of run through this. There's a planning issue that we discussed early on when we were working on our fair housing plan. And there is a point of view that if you permit residential development on the first floor in the commercial district, that you will wind up with exactly residential on the first floor of the commercial district. There is a point of view that the economics of residential versus commercial are different. And there is the need to have a uniform standard across the area in order to make it work. The M&M project is the first project we're working through that really starts from our goals and involves implementation on an actual piece of property with actual limitations. And we worked through issues relating to what we have at this moment over a period of months to try and get the setbacks to where we could accept them on balance, how to deal with the third story setback, how to deal with the parking, the entrance and the exit, the front on Cedar. I've discussed with people the preference for residential on the first floor. I personally believe, to the extent that my personal opinion matters, that the decision to require first floor commercial is important to maintaining a commercial district in Fairhaven. It starts on the Sunoco site and it moves around the entirety of the commercial district. Can I imagine what Diane is picturing? And Diane and I have engaged in this discussion in other public meetings. Of course, I can picture it working nicely on that site. The question is what happens from there. There is a commercial property across the street, both on Cedar and River. The property immediately to the rear is commercial. The property, the two-family property that's adjacent is residential, but the next one's commercial as well. So I don't know. Look, at some point, this comes down to decisions about what you want. And I think that's a valid point of view. But the decision was discussed and debated, and we came down with the agreement that we wanted to protect first floor commercial in Fairhaven.
Am I speaking now?
Yes.
Okay, so Todd, I so value your viewing point on everything you've done for Fairhaven. I think you are a very sound mind. One of the comments that you made is, you know, it's what you discussed. And, you know, before I go on about, like, I understand that across the street is Krauser's, which, you know, in this day and age and where we are right now with the pandemic, who knows what tomorrow will bring. And you say that the next door to the left is a two-family house and next to that is the bank. The bank is not obtrusively a retail looking space. And yes, you do have a two-family house next door, and you have the commercial space behind Boynton & Boynton is for sale. And that too could, who knows, go to a bidder who wants to make apartment buildings. There's so many what ifs that I'm asking the council to consider before they put in hard fact that it has to be retail on the bottom, to consider the possibility of making it like the house to the left with a little front porch. And that's, I'm not trying to persuade someone otherwise. I'm just trying to hear that maybe with where we are today, as opposed to a few months ago, that possibility exists. And with that possibility, it answers your question to the parking if it was retail on the bottom. I mean, I think it's almost a win-win. So I'm just looking for the possibility that it could look like the house next door. And then
I'll jump in here. The settlement agreement with the courts has already, taken this into consideration. It is retail on the bottom floor, including, they also included the actual, site plan schematic that we had agreed upon with the developer. So, that ship has sailed as far as this ordinance is not going to change the fact that the agreement already has those things laid out.
So, can I ask, who, I missed it, Teresa. I missed, where it became, it has to be retail below. Because I'm getting other texts from people who don't know what M&M property is. So I'm getting texts from people who are saying, what's the M&M property? Because they don't realize it's the Sunoco property. So I got lost in text messages. So where did we lose the right for it to possibly be looking like the house next door?
So Teresa was saying that because it's come out of the court, that our proposal included retail on the first floor, and that was approved. So the decision about permitting first floor of this particular project to be residential has already been made and approved by the court.
So what court is that, Todd, if I may ask?
Was it Superior Court in Freehold?
County.
Okay, so it was a whole fair housing. It was a Superior Court on the fair housing deal. So are you telling me that if we wanted to, we can't go back to the Superior Court and ask it to be residential on the first floor?
No, I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that we've moved through that decision making, provided it to the court. Keep in mind that when we are saying first floor commercial, we're providing an area that's excluded from availability for fair housing. So getting approval for first floor commercial was not guaranteed. It's something that we wanted, and it limits the amount of apartments that can be built and how many can be affordable. So we were pleased that that was accepted. Just two quick comments, and then you've asked for council comments, and so I'm gonna stop talking. But the first is that we don't know about the aesthetics of this yet, so we can work with them on the aesthetics. And you're right that the residential character of the building immediately to the west is appealing. We need to figure out what it would look like in this footprint with a step back third floor. But it's true that that residential character is important, and if we can find a way to preserve that, I think we'd like to. The other thing is that moving forward with whatever we do within the overlay zone, we'll set a standard for people to meet, developers to meet, and then if they want to ask for deviations, they can come before the zoning of the planning board and ask for that. So for instance, the building immediately to the rear, it's going to have the same requirement with regard to first floor commercial. If they can develop a plan that shows us that first floor residential makes more sense, then we'll evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But the default will be commercial on the first floor.
And why is that? Because it's a commercial overlay?
It's like that because of the values that were negotiated and decided upon given our options, with the concern that if we permitted first floor residential, that you would get that instead of retail.
So is retail more profitable for a landlord?
So we didn't get into economics, but other than to say that new projects that are being developed favor apartments over commercial. Commercial's harder to figure out, and towns that don't have commercial districts like to have them. And if we would start to lose ours, we're afraid that we would really lose it. You need a certain amount of commercial businesses in order for people to see you as a destination. And those were the concerns that we were evaluating when we decided that we did not want to favor first floor residential.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have one more question. Todd, you said commercial is harder to figure out. What does that mean? I'm trying to follow, but.
So apartments are generally straightforward to rent and fill. They're easier to spec, they're easier to develop because people know what the numbers look like. They know who wants them. With regard to commercial and the way things are changing, COVID-19 aside, we've all seen changes in the retail industry. So when you're putting together a project and you need to figure out how your commercial element's going to work, you have to figure out what not only today's retail is, but what the future of retail is. Okay. Some of the strength in the retail market is in smaller downtown areas. serviced by the local community versus malls and strip malls. And we're hopeful that the development that will come will be mindful of the residents in Fairhaven, who they want to support, what they want out of the small businesses, and that they cater to the neighborhoods. If they want to survive, it would make sense if that's what they do.
Great explanation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Diane.
Diane, any further questions?
No, I'll let you guys go.
Anybody else have any other questions? We have about 31 attendees, which is great to see. Anybody else have anything they'd like to question about the agenda? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion to close public comments on agenda items?
Motion to close, Mayor?
Second.
Thank you. Approval of minutes, May 11, 2020 regular meeting and May 11, 2020 executive session. May I have a motion to offer?
Motion to offer?
Second.
Allison, roll call, please.
Council members Christner Keith,
Yes.
Koch,
Yes.
McHugh,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Sorensen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. New business. I'm going to add a few items in here. First off, been on many conference calls as of late in regards to getting the economy going with different mayors and also on the governor's conference calls. And it's become apparent that the best way to get the economy going again is for the people to do it, and that local control of the mayors to decide or to look at and examine how each business individually returns to business is going to be vital in establishing or reestablishing our economy. So to that end, I've asked Councilwoman Sorensen to interface with the Fairhaven Business Association and Councilwoman Koch as a representative of the zoning and planning to go out and talk and speak with each one of our businesses to encourage them and assist them in establishing a reopening plan, or if they're open, to refine their COVID sanitation plans. Some of the ideas that have been bandied about have been the grant waivers, temporary waivers, and we must be very mindful of temporary waivers becoming permanent, where parking spaces are given up to tents to facilitate outdoor dining and outdoor sidewalk type shopping. So I'd like to thank Councilwoman Sorensen and Councilman Koch for their willingness to step forward and work on this committee. And the idea is to have the plans in place so when the governor does go to stage 2 and then eventually stage 3 of reopening the New Jersey economy, that all our businesses are prepared and ready to move forward.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Can Susan Rule come off the meeting? Does anybody still need her?
No, I believe we've completed that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you, Susan.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
The other portion of new business has to deal with the brush site, which Ms. Jillian Hoagland was speaking about earlier, and I know has a lot of concern in the neighborhood. I have done a tremendous amount of work on the brush site. I have met with local engineers, county officials, state officials, DEP officials, looking for a way to incrementally change and or alter the operation of the brush site to minimize the impact to the neighborhood. I understand there are people in the neighborhood who perhaps purchased their homes not knowing that it was there, and that's unfortunate. And the fact is that the brush grinding has been going on for nigh 40 years, perhaps longer, we don't know. But there are a few plans. I actually put some together And so now what we're going to do is, I'm asking Councilman Chris Rodriguez to head a committee to look at all the alternatives to either relocating the site somewhere within the Fairhaven Fields area, if that is possible, which it is very difficult to do, and or find other ways to reroute traffic. So Chris, I want to thank you for that. But I'd like to say to the neighbors, the brush grinding has been going on for a long time. I've spoken to mayors going back 30 years. There's never been a complaint noted as regards to the health of the site. The site is licensed by the New Jersey DEP. It's inspected regularly by the County of Monmouth. And, you know, New Jersey's probably one of the most highly regulated environmental communities in the world. And I know there's a great deal of commotion about this. I want to rest you assured, if there was truly a health hazard, I do believe the DEP would have already established that and alerted us to it. But it is a Class B recycling facility, and we will work to do what we can to mitigate the impact to the neighborhood. And I would like to thank Chris very much for his endeavors going forward.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have our council committee reports. First up is Councilman Banahan. Jim Banahan, do you have anything to report?
Yes, actually, this is the night for introduction and approval at the same time. We have the fiscal 2020 up for introduction and approval this evening. I know there's been quite a lot of work done on this by everyone, probably more so in this year than in years gone by. I've seen quite a few, in part just because of where we were overall, and then of course specifically due to concerns over the health crisis. And that's, again, next step. That's probably the most important thing we have with respect to finance at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Next up, Personnel, Councilwoman Krishna Keefe.
No, the Personnel Committee has not met recently. I'll note that on the consent agenda is the appointment of 2 part-time seasonal DPW employees. Historically, I understand the borough retains 3 part-time seasonal DPW employees, and this is used as a stopgap measure to help in the more green times of the year, but obviates the need to hire a full-time employee throughout the entirety of the year. And that's all I have today.
Thank you very much. Planning and Zoning, Councilwoman Koch.
Yes, we've actually concluded for the month of May all our old business. Moving forward for June, a week from Thursday, we have our June zoning board meeting. There are 3 pieces of business that we will be looking at. The agenda right now is just a draft agenda. It's not permanent. And then on June 16th, the planning board will meet to discuss 1 order of business. And so that's pretty much the planning and zoning board. As for fair share housing, you had a very complete overview of our timeline and what our projected moves are moving in the very near future. So I think fair share housing has been addressed. And the restaurant committee, we are scheduled to meet either this Wednesday or next Wednesday, and we will be moving forward with setting up a date for our public meeting. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Betsy. Next, we have police, fire, and OEM. Councilman McHugh. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. You pretty much said what I was just planning and keeping it short. Fairhaven, we're at 4 active cases. We've come down a lot. We started, I think our max was 22. So 4 active cases, and we're obviously a small town, but, you know, knock on wood, we are doing
4.
4
Did you say
active
4?
cases. 4.
That's awesome.
It was good.
Just in case.
You know, I mean, like compared to like a town like Brielle or other similar sized towns, which I think Joe was Brielle, I think 25. Rumson's up there, Little Silver's up around there. So even relatively to our numbers, we're doing well, and that's obviously testament to our residents. We're doing the right thing. So keep it up. Good job. That's it, Mayor.
And thank you, Mike. And I'd like to, I think our official number with the county is 25 that were totally tested positive. But I'd really like to thank Chief McGovern, our OEM coordinator, and our Monmouth County Health Commission #1. Joe spends a tremendous amount of time on the phone. People go on the list when they test positive, and then coordinating through Joe, our Health Commission interviews the patients on a fairly regular basis to determine their level of health. And once they've gotten to a point and the interviews, and I guess a couple of weeks have passed, they take them off the list. So we and so we are very fortunate that Joe's putting forth that effort with the Health Commission. And I'd also like to thank really the people of Fairhaven in the entirety for their social distancing, for being conscientious when they're out in public, wearing the masks when they're at the Acme or other shops. And that's really shown in the fact that our numbers have stayed low and we've gotten healthy rather quickly. Next is engineering DPW Borough Facilities, Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got 3 quick topics, and I'll add a footnote on finance as well as the alternate to Chair Banahan to the Finance Committee. First, bulk pickup zones 1 and 2 week of June 1st, and zones 3 and 4 week of June 8th. I know people have done a lot to clean up their garages and their basements and attics and everything else, and so there will be pickups those 2 weeks. Another reminder, second thing, garbage is picked up twice a week throughout the summer. Many of you know that, but newcomers to town may not know that. So we have your normal pickup in your zone, and then we have a pickup on Fridays. It's it'll last all through the summer and in our normal time. And then lastly, the brush removal from streets and the brush site. The mayor mentioned a lot of things earlier. I just want to echo some of what he said. We've worked with the community. It was important to listen and discuss these topics, and myself and many others have done this, including the mayor and other council people. So thank you to the residents for your participation there. I've worked closely with the mayor, and I thank you for running lead with the contractor and weighing lots of different ideas and the concept of a committee. Many of us walked the site this past week to gather more information and try to determine whether to move, further delay the removal of the brush or whether to do it. We weighed a lot of issues, including a fire concern of many of the residents. We did not start the grind today as normally we would have based on the contract and the communication that came out a week or so ago. We wanted to hold off until we were able to discuss it in a public forum. So that won't commence until tomorrow. The longer term approach though, which the mayor has mentioned, will evaluate and put together an ad hoc committee appointed by the mayor, which I'll participate, which he mentioned. We'll also try to get that pulled together so that we can meet during the summer, hopefully maybe even in June. We understand that this is already a stressful time. We're adding trucks and noise and so forth while kids are not in school. We didn't anticipate this, but some of these things are beyond our control in terms of parents not commuting and schools being closed and so forth. For this, I apologize. It's not something within our control, and we understand it causes additional stress. I want to ask people to work with us, and we'll get to a good resolution. The finance footnote that I want to make is that the grace period ends shortly. For those of you who've taken advantage of the grace period, we got a few days left. If you missed the end of the grace period, your accrued interest goes back to May 1, and it's calculated from that point forward until you submit your tax payment. So the key here is to get your tax payments in by the close of business Monday, June 1st. With that, I'll turn it back to the mayor. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. And our last is Parks and Recreation and Communications, Councilman Sorensen. Susan?
Yes, hi. From a communications perspective, we don't really have any update other than I guess everybody's been seeing all the constant contacts that have been going out and the updates and the Facebook postings, and we will continue to keep everybody informed. And then not only continue to keep people informed, but that we will also share it to multiple pages. And there's multiple areas that you can receive this. And once again, I'll do my plug. If you've not signed up for any of the constant contact emails, please email Betty Berube at the Borough. And then the one other thing I wanted to say about communications is I really would like to give a shout out to Betty Ann, because she has been a rock star during this entire pandemic, and I don't have a moment's notice. She's been putting out notifications, whether it's coming from me, Teresa, the mayor, Allison, it doesn't matter, or the chief. She's been phenomenal. So, and keeping a cool head and through all of this. So kudos to her, a little thank you to her. From a recreational perspective, speaking of thank yous, the last thank you Thursday will be this Thursday at 7 p.m. And it will be at, thank you Thursday, and it's to thank all the frontliners at 7 p.m. I also would like to say that the Memorial Day, the virtual Memorial Day ceremony is available on the website. And I would like to thank DJ Breckenridge, our recreation director. He did a phenomenal job along with Tyler Breckenridge, who did the video for us. It's really a lovely, if you have not gone out to see it, it's a lovely, lovely, lovely ceremony that they put together on regarding Memorial Day. And then also, if you have not, I also would like to thank Tom Billy, who at 3 o'clock yesterday on a moment's notice went out to Memorial Park and played taps for Taps Across America, which happens at 3 o'clock, which was amazing. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that the recreational department is going to meet in June virtually on Zoom. We don't know exactly what day it is, even though there is a day on the calendar. Our goal is to be able to provide additional information regarding camps and things like that. And we're waiting to see what the governor comes out with on June 6th. And the meeting is prior to that. So we may move the meeting out a week, but we will alert everybody and make sure that that's well known as to what's happening. Some of our neighboring towns are canceling things. And we want to know what the state wants to do before we make any decisions. And I know that a lot of people are anxious about that, whether you're working at a camp, want to send your kids to camp, and what summer programs we're doing, but more to come in June. And that's it, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now be moving on to the consent agenda. We will pull out the introduction of the municipal budget, do that second, so that would be 2020-97. So I'm going to ask for an approval of the consent agenda 2020-98 through 2020-104. Allison, any other additions or amendments?
No, I sent you an amendment to the executive session.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be the artworks, but you were given the handouts that Sal had provided, so we should be good.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else on the council have any additions, corrections, or abstentions that they'd like? Seeing none to the consent agenda of 2020-98 and 2020-104, may I have a motion offer?
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Banahan,
Yes.
Christner Keefe,
Yes.
Koch,
Yes.
McHugh,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Sorensen.
Yes.
Okay. In regards to resolution 2020-97, introduction of the 2020 municipal budget, may I have a motion to offer?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Any questions or comments on the municipal budget? Seeing none, may I have a roll call vote?
I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to chime in. I thought I was still on mute. I do have comments with respect to the municipal budget, but I can make it in conjunction with my vote unless your preference is for me to speak on it now.
Well, we have a motion and second, so if there's any concerns you have about the budget, please, just now is the time.
Now, before the vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
You may want to do it now just so the other members can consider your comments before they vote.
Certainly. So just by way of, and I will hope to keep my comments short. I want to first of all thank the Finance Committee and our borough professionals who do a great job of trying to address the simultaneous needs of our community and also address the intentions of council. And this is my first rodeo with the municipal budget. So I've had a very steep learning curve for the past 3 weeks when I first received all of the respective documents and information. I spent a lot of time speaking with Finance Committee members, our borough professionals, and exploring all the various documents, requesting additional documents. Thank you, Allison, for helping me get my hands around them to understand everything that's happening. For those of you who sat through the workshop meeting on May 11th, I had lots of questions with respect to the borough finances, our appropriations and revenues, and the direction of our budget for 2020. The timeline is such, and Teresa, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the timeline is such that we are in a place where we need to move forward expeditiously. Without a budget in place, we are always voting on emergency appropriations. So, you know, we've been focused on that, and we need to look forward to getting the budget adopted. The budget that's before us, you know, today's vote is from my understanding to introduce it and approve it. It's one vote. And when I look through the budget, I see a lot of concerns that I have with respect to some areas of spending. And I'm concerned we are in a pandemic and we were not here at the beginning of the year. We were not here in February. It started to unravel in March. The prior decisions of prior governing bodies could not have contemplated the pandemic that we're in. And I believe that it's important for us to be conservative and prudent. I believe that historically we should be looking towards the information that we know, such as the recessions that occurred in 08 and 09 that resulted in 8% and higher unemployment rates in Fairhaven. And I hope that that does not repeat itself. But I also think we need to take that information and use it to be as conservative as possible when we're looking at spending our taxpayer dollars. So while we have existing needs, many needs, I think our budget needs to reflect the current realities that we're facing. I don't believe that now is a time when we should be spending more than we can possibly contemplate. And I think it's important that we're as conservative and prudent as possible to not overcommit financially in many areas. So I think our residents are counting on us to take those steps to be as conservative as possible in looking at this year's budget. Right now, the average assessed property of, if my numbers are correct, of about $862,000 will see an increase of $315 on the municipal portion of taxes. While I support advancing this budget and introducing it for the purposes of getting the public's feedback before it goes to a hearing and an adoption vote, I do not agree with the word approval being a part of that vote. I am coming at this from a place where I would like to see, and I look forward to working with the governing body members and the mayor and our professionals to see where there's an opportunity to reduce some of this thing in the current budget that we're looking at here today. One of the areas I'm concerned about is the capital improvement fund, which is proposed to increase from $215,000 of appropriation last year to $925,000 of an appropriation this year. And I understand that there are reasons that the finance committee and our professionals are making those recommendations. I believe that there's an opportunity to see if there's a downward movement of those numbers to reduce the tax increase for our community. And so while I come to this vote with a no, I do believe that between now and adoption, there's an opportunity to make changes to impact the overall tax burden on our community, to see if there's an opportunity to reduce some of our appropriations. And there are numbers that are out of our control. Our trash and recycling expenses, excuse me, have increased significantly, and we could not have anticipated that. Revenue is down, but we have to look at all these numbers in conjunction with each other and the pandemic environment that we are in right now. We have to listen and understand this climate, and we don't know. It's very unpredictable. So I would just ask my fellow governing body members to work with me. I'm glad to look at this budget. I've spent a lot of time doing it already and trying to understand it. And I am hopeful that we can make some downward movements, and that by the time we get to the public hearing and adoption, that I can be a yes on this issue. And I'm glad to have further discussion, comment, questions, because again, this is my first opportunity to really get down in the details of a municipal budget. And it's actually a lot of fun and very interesting. But I also have the concerns that I expressed earlier about how we're appropriating our money and taxation is increasing in this environment.
First of all, I'm going to say, in order to change the adoption, the budget once it's introduced here, we would need to do a budget amendment. So I would assume that when you refer to voting positively, it would be post a budget amendment to change this budget or not, to leave it in its current state. But I would like to say that, you know, I said so during the budget workshop, and I will repeat this. There's an awful lot of work that has gone into this budget, and you have to tie it to an immense amount of work that's gone into looking at the borough's capital needs. And I'm not just talking about the borough's capital needs when it comes to facilities. I'm talking about all our many capital needs, you know, including, you know, road projects and park projects and new equipment purchases and all the things that we've looked at from 2016 to 2022. And there's been no decisions made for what the governing body actually will do in 2020 or 21 or 22. That's really up to the governing body. But the approach has been thought out and thought out well. And when you look at what we're doing in the capital improvement fund, I want to make it very clear, the capital improvement fund as budgeted currently in this budget is really a combination of holding the line steady between what the borough budgeted last year for debt service and capital and what the borough is budgeting this year for debt service and capital. And what you're seeing as a reverse on what is going to debt service is down this year. So we put money in the capital improvement fund to offset the need to increase debt service in a large scale way going forward. Because no matter what the governing body does decide, there are capital needs for the borough that are going to have to be funded. So that's really, that was done with purpose. It was done over a period of you know, a couple of years, looking at, you know, when debt dropped off, when we issued bonds, you know, to take on new debt, and holding this placeholder for future to hold debt service steady is really the intent of this budget. I think it is fair to say, I understand no one wants to see a increase in taxes. This is a very unusual year. I'll say what I said before, we don't really have a spending problem in this budget. Our appropriations are only up minimally, they're up in the amount of 171,000 over last year. And considering that budgeting, the recycling and trash budget increased by $230,000, we've actually cut appropriations from last year. So, I have gone over this budget with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm not saying that the governing body can't make other decisions when it comes to either, personnel or services for the balance of this year, if you really want to cut this back. But we'd be hard pressed to change or to bring down appropriations any lower than they currently are in this budget without making some of those changes. I also want to reiterate that one of the major contributors to our fund balance, to our surplus, which is a revenue in every year's budget, is the cancellation of the appropriation reserves. And the CFO for this current budget, for the 2020 budget, on 12/31/21, will cancel those reserves, meaning we'll cancel anything we didn't spend on this budget. And if we cut the appropriations portions of this budget so tight that nothing lapses at the end of 2021, you're going to take a big hit to surplus then, and the following year's budget will be very difficult to utilize a consistent amount of surplus or to regenerate surplus. So I know, Meg, every member of this governing body has spent a lot of time on this budget. Everyone's spoken to me, from the newest council members to the most senior. And we've looked at a lot of moving parts, and there are a lot of moving parts to this budget. But as drafted, with all the considerations we had, and keep in mind, we have what you're looking at now is the post-COVID draft, because revenues for the Borough of Fairhaven were already looking, down based on, the projections of what we collected last year. But when COVID hit, we had to go back in again and look at every single revenue and ask ourselves, is it realistic to think that we're going to collect the same amount of money this year? And we could have left it be. We could have said, you know what, we're gonna leave it what we collected last year and just assume that. But once again, if we didn't collect that revenue this year, it would hit your surplus as of 12/31, and it put you in a difficult spot next year. So in any budget, we're looking back a couple of years and we're looking forward a couple of years. It's not just a moment in time. So that's I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody, member of the governing body when it comes to that. I want to make it clear to the governing body members and the public, if the governing body, reduction or the increase in taxes to the average homeowner at $314.71, which is $26.23 a month, in order to bring that down to zero, we would need to come up with $692,380 to do so, and that would be a very, very challenging thing to do in this current budget. Anything between zero and your current $26 a month is something that is really up to the governing body to make a determination on.
Thank you,
Teresa, I'm sorry, Mayor. Councilwoman Keefe, I'd also like to add that I'm a little bit troubled because we've spent so much time together, and I know that other members of the governing body, including me, bringing in our former chair of the Finance Committee to give you a historic perspective, have explained this in great detail. And the best analogy I can offer is that by trying to pare down taxes in the current cycle, it's like putting a heavy weight on a rubber band. When it catches up to us in subsequent years, beginning next year, it's going to hit us very hard. When I look through this budget and I go through all the line items that we historically go to and look at very closely, I see operations 2020, 6.2 million, 2019, 6.1. So every line item, public events was $15,000 in 2019. It's $1 in 2020. This is a bare bones budget. It's been pared all the way down. And I'm very concerned that your comments cast doubt on the validity of this budget and really cast dispersion on all the work that's been done to bring this budget down as tightly as possible, and the lack of understanding as to what it does to us in the subsequent financial cycle. I know you'd like to find a way to reduce taxes in the 2020 budget. Again, what we look for is smooth planning. What we don't want to do is forestall any of the capital improvement work and the money associated with it, only to have a sharp increase in our subsequent year. That'll be more painful to our taxpayers. And when we look at 314 on an average house, this is a nominal increase. There's nothing here to be cut.
Jim, I appreciate that. And, I take exception to mischaracterizations. I'm not looking to reduce taxes. I'm simply looking to reduce the amount of the increase. I understand that budgets typically go up every single year, and that that it's beneficial to have that opportunity for an increased budget every year. But I actually think $15 on the average assessed property increase on the municipal portion only is significant. And again, the big line item change from last year to this year is in the capital improvement fund. It went from $215,000 to $925,000. And again, we've talked about this, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate former Councilman John Peters taking the time to speak with me to walk me through it. And I think that our appreciation for the various line items are different. I am concerned that the funding the capital improvement fund so significantly this year over last year is with certain intents and ideas in mind. And while I acknowledge that we do need to address our capital improvement significantly, and that is an underlying issue that has been ongoing for years, I take exception that this is the year to increase it so significantly that it's impacting our taxpayers in a time of recession. I don't want to see residents leaving town and the fact that our taxes are going up being a part of that decision. So again, I repeat, I would love to have the opportunity to continue to work with the governing body members to see where there's opportunity and room to reduce some of those appropriations, perhaps including capital improvement fund, which again is the biggest line item jump from last year to this year. And I understand that many decisions were made by prior governing bodies with respect to our debt and the notes and the bonds. And again, I'm still learning how those funds operate. And I would be glad to engage in further conversations. But I am concerned about those increases in this environment. And I think that our budget needs to reflect our current realities. And so, with that, we are in uncertain times. And I would hope that we can take some of this under consideration for potential amendments.
Well, the time to have done that was during workshop. That's really past us. There is opportunity for amendment, but again, you're forestalling major capital work. So if you think about $314 per average household for a major road fund, major road project, it's not anything. It's not even measurable. And I don't understand the goal. I don't understand how we're going to reduce taxes in this budget and not sharply increase them in the subsequent budget, because the capital improvement work is going to have to be done, if not this year, next. And if we don't begin it this year in favor of a very nominal tax cut, it's going to result in a sharper increase in the subsequent years.
Jim, can you just touch on what you're talking about in terms of the road project? I'm not sure that everybody knows what's coming down the pipe.
Well, there's really 4 road projects. And again, if we hold them off, it's only going to happen in the subsequent years, and it's going to result in a sharper increase. I'm not sure of a better analogy than the one of pulling a heavyweight with a rubber band. It's going to catch up to us, and the impact will be that much greater in subsequent years. So again, I'm not sure what the goal is. To just have a short-term reduction in favor of sharper increases in the subsequent year? Is that what we want to do?
Well, Jim, I don't know the answer to the question, but I do think it's important that in a recession that we're being cognizant of the needs of the financial environment. And again, I'll go back at the workshop session. I had the budget documents for 5 days at that point. And I know you weren't there, but I did sit and ask our professionals and our finance committee questions for I think over 30 minutes to try and understand some of these line items in the budget. So I did not have a proper understanding at that time to propose amendments. This all came on a timeline that was not necessarily feasible, and government has adjusted those from the state on down, has adjusted how to allow us additional time to deal with the budget. But again, we hadn't had an opportunity by that point to make those changes. So, I don't know that there was another way to do it. And that's why I'm speaking on this issue today and now. And I'm not suggesting that we kick any capital improvements down the road. What I'm suggesting is that we be more careful and mindful, and maybe we need to make hard decisions about what capital improvements we are going to do, and maybe things that we've authorized in the past, that the governing body has authorized in the past, we need to take a step back on and say, you know what, we can't do that right now, and we need to prioritize other things. We have many facilities projects that impact our borough employees, and maybe we need to prioritize those over some of the road projects. Again, I don't know, but I'm looking to the governing body to work with me to try and find those answers and to see if, again, what are our priorities and where is the room for an opportunity to address the concerns of this recession environment that we are in and will continue to be in for some period of time.
Okay, I thought we had done that. Tonight, we can only vote yes, no, or you can abstain. And then by the 23rd, we have to have any amendments ready. That's the timeline. That's not described by the Finance Committee. That's the timeline.
Actually, I think it's sooner than that. Teresa, I think in your email you had indicated any amendments would have to happen by a certain date, and I can't find it because we have...
No, I'm saying the 23rd is the date for adoption.
No, I understand that. The 23rd is the date for the vote on the adoption, but any amendments, Teresa, I think there was a date.
You actually could amend prior at your next meeting if you so desired. You could amend on the 23rd also. I'd have to speak to Colleen as far as the process goes. Obviously, you have to hold the public hearing. You can, I believe, postpone the adoption if the governing body decides to do so. Just like any other ordinance, you can delay it to a later date. One of the things I want to make clear is if the governing body, just for the governing body members and the public, when you look at this budget, if you look at the appropriation side, to look through any line items that you would like to cut by department, you could certainly go through there and make those recommendations. I will say that I think anyone who's looked at this budget in great detail, and it is available on our website, and I have had members of the public ask for copies. You will see that those line items, for the most part, almost every department is flat or below what we allocated last year. When you get down to the 900s, and that's where you get into the real meat of this budget, and you look at the combination of debt service, and you look at the combination of the capital improvement fund. Really, what's being done here is you're holding debt service and capital improvement steady, together as in total. Think of them as Part A and Part B, pretty much between 19 and 20, reasonably so. And then the difference is that in this budget you have less debt service and more money going to the capital improvement fund, as opposed to last year where you had more debt service and less money in the capital improvement fund. But if you're going to look to change that, keeping in mind that the whole above the 215 that you put for pay-as-you-go capital, the additional money in there that's sitting as a placeholder really represents a fairly close amount to the dollar change in our appropriations this year. And I think that that's something that, you can look at and ask yourself, are you going to take it out of the current fund lines, which have really been cut to the bone, or are you going to look at that area of capital improvement fund and debt and say to yourself, do you want to try to bring that down? And that's really, they're the moving parts in this budget.
I mean, the elephant in the room is if we really want to cut services and we want to cut people, that's where a lot of the cost lies. This is capital improvement fund increases, I think is less than 10% here. We've got 90% that we're looking at. If we want to make material cuts, that's where it's got to happen, is in the 90 percentile. And I don't know that we're currently in a situation where we should do that. I think
we've got to keep an eye on. If you referenced earlier the financial crisis in 2008 and unemployment. Housing values took the biggest dip 4 years after the financial crisis. So it's unclear, and I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if that's going to happen at all in this financial environment, either this year, next year, or even 4 years from now. And I don't know what unemployment is, though I was trying to figure it out by zip code. I haven't gotten to that solution yet. One thing I do know is that May sales in 2020 were 2% higher than May sales in terms of real estate values than in 2019. So we remain, even in an environment, strange COVID and shelter in place environment, the property values remain strong. And these are listings that were put on during COVID that are reaching higher and higher values. So it's a confusing environment for sure. I do believe that we should be conservative here, but we've got 90% of the budget to look at if we want to cut brush pickup or police officers or DPW workers or administrative workers or shut entire facilities down. I'm not advocating, frankly, for any of those things. I think people value the services that we provide to the community. It's just a difficult thing to stomach in an environment like this. But I think Teresa may have said it, you got to look back, but you've also got to look forward. And there are material consequences deviating as we go forward, creating that chain reaction that we don't want to create, where let's say we reduce capital costs or set asides and we replace it with more expensive funding options, then we've actually just made it worse for ourselves because those funding options have costs associated with them. So there's no great answer. Like you said, Meg, there's a tiny incremental, increase that's expected every year. Our big unknown, or the thing that came out of nowhere, was the cost for recycling and the cost for garbage pickup, not from the vendor, but for the receipt of those of that tonnage has gone up dramatically, and it's just not something that we can control. And I do think that road projects, where the River Road project that the county's doing, where on the west side of town, where sidewalks and curbs haven't been touched in 40 years, those are the kinds of things that take money. Now we can fund it by borrowing, but there's a cost to borrowing as opposed to the cost for funding with cash. And so we'll end up, like Jim said, we'll end up costing ourselves more money down the road. These are decisions that, as a governing body, they're not easy to make, but we've got to make them. We've also got to comply with, the state's requirement to have a budget so that we can issue tax bills for Q3, which is bearing down on us, as you know. So if you've got ideas about cutting, over the next couple of weeks before we finalize this, I think everybody on the governing body would be interested in getting this down as far as possible, but we've got to weigh the implications for other areas.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. I think the one area where we diverge is that the idea of the capital improvement fund being what it is in this proposed budget, and that it's intended to be used as a placeholder for our current debt service, but also to be used as a down payment for future debt service, is really concerning to me. We, in this environment, we should not be considering capital acquisitions and increasing debt service, taking out new debt. I am very concerned about that. So while I agree with you, you said it a moment ago that we should try to pay for these capital improvements with cash on hand, which is what you mentioned with respect to the road projects. that have been previously authorized but are not yet funded. But again, I maintain those concerns. And again, I think the area that we can make adjustments would be capital improvements. But I want to continue the conversation. With you, Jim, Mayor Lucarelli, everybody who has thoughts and ideas on where we can address the 2020 budget, if at all, and maybe others are not concerned. But I wanted to make sure that I was clear on my concerns and my position, and that in this environment and climate, we need to be extremely cognizant now and tomorrow and next year. I don't advocate at this time for continuing to increase our debt, despite the fact that interest rates are low. I think we have a lot of work to do to see if we can control spending, and I appreciate that our revenues are down and our appropriations are up on certain items that are out of our control. But
Meg, I gotta interrupt. What spending would we possibly control? What are you referencing? Because I don't see the only increase in anything really, with the exception of the capital improvements funds, right, is the trash pickup. Everything else has been cut, and the increases to salaries that you personally recommended. So we have, which I'm not advocating against. I think that they are very well deserved, but I'm saying you advocated for the increases in the salaries. So there's no excess spending here. Teresa, Colleen, Jim Banahan, and Chris Rodriguez, and then previously Jim, and I know that John Peters has been on this. They do an exceptional, and the mayor, excuse me, they do an exceptional job. I've had the privilege of being on council for several years. I've been on council where we've decreased budget. I've been on council where we've had a flat budget. I will tell you, the amount of effort that goes into this is exceptional. We have won awards. The town of Fairhaven, the borough of Fairhaven, and Jim, keep me honest, and Ben, keep me honest here. We've won, I think it's 6 or 7 in a row. We won we won awards in the state of New Jersey. So for you to say that that this governing body and the finance committee has not really taken this and ripped it apart and done the best for the borough of Fairhaven is a bit insulting to the finance committee. I'm sorry, but it is. And for you to say that you didn't have enough time to look at this budget, every year it's the same amount of time. And whether you're new or not, you had time to spend with Teresa, with Colleen, with Jim, with John Peters. I get what you're saying. I do. I never want to see anybody have $1 increase in their budget from the municipality. I get it. This is very difficult for any of us to move forward with having an increase to the budget or an increase to taxes or to a taxpayer. But sometimes it happens and it's out of our control. If I hear one more time from one more person that River Road needs to be paved, if I had a nickel, I'd be a millionaire at this point. Because River Road we have capital improvements that we have kicked the can, and I don't mean since I've been on council, I mean decades of kicking the can down the road of facilities that need to be done. If we don't put money in that capital improvements fund, we are only hurting next year. Next year is going to be worse. The year after that's going to be even worse. So at some point, we need to level this off and just move forward. And I'm sorry, I take exception to the fact that you state you didn't have enough time, because you need to make the time. And I'm sorry, you need to make the time to do that. And I did. I reached out to Teresa. I reached out to Jim. I had conversations if there's something that could be. They cut so many things out of this budget that in years past have always been in there. And so you can vote no, and that's all fine and good. But do not say that you did not have enough time to review this budget. That's insulting to the people that are the other council members. And don't say that the finance committee did not do their job, which is what I'm hearing.
Respond. You've mischaracterized me, what I've said several times now. So, I'd appreciate if you kept it honest here. All I did was compliment the
only honest. Don't say that I'm not honest. That's insulting.
Councilwoman, it appears. So we have a motion and a second to move forward with the budget.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I'd like to have an opportunity to respond.
I don't see any benefit to it going back and forth. And I think you've taken an ample amount of opportunity to speak and state your opinion repetitively. I know you spent a tremendous amount of time with Teresa and our office staff. Even former Council President Jonathan Peters afforded you time, and you spent time with Chris Rodriguez and Jim Vanahan. I believe where you're getting hung up is on the $900,000, which is coming from debt service and being allocated to capital. The biggest thing we have to worry about, as Teresa pointed out, is the recharge of surplus going into next year if revenue drops off. I understand where it is you want to go, but that might help in the short term, but what it would do is it would magnify the pain to the taxpayer in the future. The issue we have at hand is, and the reason why we're dedicating debt service that is rolling off towards capital is so we can replace our depleted capital asset. Okay, the youngest building we have is over 50 years old. They're dilapidated. They're in bad states of disrepair. We've spent 5 years looking at the most efficient way to replace the capital assets. 623, we've looked at Sunoco, we've looked at many different options, and we will be going back to relook at those options through the lens of COVID, because the lens at which we were examining those capital improvements has basically been shattered by this current economy. But it would be utterly irresponsible, and I do believe Teresa's described this to you almost ad nauseum. It would be irresponsible to go back and cut this for a short-term benefit. So, you know, I understand your concern. I understand the concern for the taxpayer. I've been mayor, this is my 9th year as mayor. And in the first 3 years, we held the taxes absolutely flat, while many other communities just went to the 2 cap and kept it going. The modus operandi for most municipalities prior to the Christie administration is on an annual basis, they just increased budgets 6-7% year after year after year. It's one of the reasons New Jersey's in the position that it is. And I appreciate the fact that you don't have the historical context of this, okay? But to sit there and pick at one item without looking at the borough holistically is probably not the best way in which to do it. I mean, we could pick at any and focus on any expense item and say, get rid of it, but you have to understand the impact to the overall budget and how budgets from 2019 roll in effect 2020, and how 2020 will roll in effect 2021. And it would be irresponsible to go down the course, I believe, what you recommend is to go after the $900,000, because we do have to build a new DPW, we do have to build a new police station, and we really should do something to renovate and or build a new borough hall. These are not things that are, how do we put it? These are not things that are one item, okay? These are needs. These are things that we have to do. Prior governing bodies have made the conscious decision to hold the debt service as capital so the taxpayer can afford these and they don't suffer a whiplash. So that being said, we will continue the conversation. And believe me, I understand how difficult it is to comprehend the budget. It's not something you can pick up in a matter of weeks or months. It actually takes a year or two of going through the budget cycle before you really begin to understand all the intricacies. When I became mayor, one of my favorite jokes was, here's a $9 million corporation, okay, simple enough to run, and here's the accounting system you have to use to run it. And you'd say that's crazy, but that is New Jersey. So with that, and noted objections from Councilperson Keith, I'd like to call a vote. Allison?
Council members Banahan,
Yes.
Christner Keefe,
No.
Koch,
Yes.
McHugh,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Sorensen.
Yes.
Okay. Next on the agenda item, department reports, municipal court, motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, go to the borough, motion open.
So moved.
Second.
Here we are. Any member of the public wishes to be heard at this point, please use the raise your hand. We have Laura Carras, I believe. If I said that correctly. Teresa, please acknowledge Laura.
I see neighbor and Laura Caracas. Carras.
Okay, thank you. Hi, this is Laura Curis. Can you hear me?
Yes, Laura, and your address, please, for the record.
Okay, 43 William Street.
Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
you're go to the borough?
Yes, go to the borough. I'd just like to note that I moved on the block 2004, and just like to respectfully note that was a change in profile and the frequency of usage and a significant increase of this usage of the brush grinding site since November of 2012 due to Hurricane Sandy. Prior to that, I believe it was perhaps a once a year usage. Just wanted to respectfully put that on record, just due to observation of myself and my family moving on the block in 2004 and a comparative increase in usage in November of 2012. Thank you.
Yes, Laura, thank you very much. And it should be understood that, yes, the amount of brush coming in and the utilization by Rumson of the brush site came in and certainly peaked with Sandy. Subsequent to that, as the borough employees have retired, we replace them with interlocal agreements with Rumson and other boroughs. And in response to the borough, or the borough residents in that area, we have cut back Rumson's use of the brush site. We've also added, when the large 110 yard trailers come in, we've added police officers to escort them down the street, and this still continues to be a concern of the neighborhood. And I know some people are becoming quite active with it. I hope everybody can understand, as we move forward and examine this subject, that it is now intertwined with interlocal agreements that benefit the borough in many, many ways. And it's not something you can just simply pull out without ramifications in other places. There's also, we need to understand, in the light of, and one of the reasons I waited to discuss this, in the light of our tight budget, there is no other solution to the current manner in which we operate the brush grinding facility that does not have substantial costs that would greatly impact the borough budget. So, you know, this is not a simple matter. It will be very expensive to make any moves, but we will go forward and we will look at it. And we will do our best to address the concerns of the neighborhood. And
Thank
Laura,
you.
Thank you for giving
Thank
us
you
the
very much.
historical context.
I appreciate it.
Who's up next? TC. I believe that's Tracy Cole.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilman Rodriguez, I have a question for you in your role as point man on facilities. Knowing, I'm sure the governing body is careful and thoughtful about decision-making around facilities, especially that these times are uncertain, and we now have this sort of new complication, if you will, a new perspective on decision-making around facilities. Can you elaborate for us, at least your thoughts on how the governing body will proceed on facilities in light of the economic times we're in now?
Are you speaking about the DPW or
Well, as a citizen, it's always been presented to us as a constellation of projects.
Yep.
If you want to take it one at a time, that will be fine.
Yeah, so well chronicled on this call and many other meetings and calls in the past. We've got fairly rundown facilities, and I think everybody, I'll speak for everybody for the moment, just to generalize. Nobody wants to spend more money than we need to bring our facilities up to snuff. That includes the police department, the community center, the DPW, and assets at the Borough Hall and library that are beyond their useful life. So my personal view is we've got to figure out what is absolutely required. We've got to, within the scope of the budget, we need to anticipate some of those costs. We're not required to spend money. We're only going to spend the money that we need to. And as far as the DPW is concerned, I don't envision moving it. I envision a replacement of the current facility. I do think that it's, we've looked at a lot of options of moving it to other places in town. It doesn't make any sense. As far as the police department, I do advocate for moving it to a main artery, getting it out of a neighborhood, which could be potentially offset by the sale of lots on Fisk. If we have to rebuild in the parking lot next to it, I'm open to that as well if there's no other options, but I prefer co-locating near the firehouse. Doesn't have to be next to the firehouse, but near the firehouse and on a main artery like River Road to slow down traffic, especially with increasing traffic at the Acme Shopping Center. As far as the Borough Hall and library, I think the windows and the roof and the AC, there's a number of and there's space and loss issues as it relates to the way that the building is set up. There's good reason to make significant adjustments or move that facility, but in this current environment, we're lucky we didn't already put shovels in the ground, because this budget would have been even more impacted as a result. So we've been careful to think through and be thoughtful about how we manage our thoughts around facilities. I was not the chair. Eric Yeager was the chair for many years on facilities. I'm honored to take over his role and hopefully carry forward some good decision making made by the rest of the governing body members, but also with input from the community. I always think about the replacement of the Oceanic Bridge that the county and state are embroiled in right now, because that thing is many, many decades past its useful life. And there's a lot of community input that goes into that, and they're taking their time, they're finding the right path, and it does take time and good ideas to move those things forward. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I did the best I could.
Yeah, that was helpful. I'll just clarify one thing. You rattled off a list of the facilities, and the police department was the first one you mentioned. Would you, in your opinion, place that as a priority? I'll tell you, I see it as a priority.
The health and wellness of our employees at the police department and also at the DPW is paramount in my mind.
Yes. And I heard you say that public input and making sure there's time for those inputs to happen is a priority as well.
Yeah. Just like with the Oceanic Bridge, I use that as a parallel all the time. It's such a big change to the two towns, Middletown and Rumson, that they've taken the time to get input from the folks in those communities and their governing members. I see these types of things as very large projects for us that are going to have, you know, many decades of useful life, and I do think that you know, the public input is important.
Well, in the way of public input, and this will be my last comment, I would say as a resident and a mother, I have strong concerns about trip generators along River Road. Recent approvals for certain businesses at the Acme location, as well as the police department. Viewing it as a traffic calming entity is, there's lots of social scientists that would have sound arguments against that, if that's where you're coming from. But synergies aside, I also don't want to see us forfeit commercial properties in exchange for a government complex. I feel we have few commercial properties, especially on the West End, to work with, and a viable business district requires a kind of critical mass. We have a marginal but viable business district there, and I would urge you to think and consult with placemakers and people who really understand business districts and how to ensure their viability. Time is of the essence.
Yeah, I think we should take a holistic view. We're going to weigh every option on the table. No decisions have been made. Nothing's absolute. So I appreciate your comment.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks. Mayor, you're on mute.
Anyone of the public would like to be heard?
And we got neighbor here.
Is neighbor back?
Uh-huh.
I don't know if neighbor's hand ever came down, but that would be Diane George.
Hello?
Yes, Diane.
Hi, I'm going back to Chris with the taxes. I just have elderly.
Well, I think we lost. Are you back, Diane?
Do you hear me now?
Now we got you.
Okay, so I'm going back to, I believe it was Chris who spoke about the taxes and the neighbors. I have elderly neighbors, and they were a little concerned about how to pay them. And of course, I try to guide them. Is there another way for neighbors who are elderly that don't have cell phones or maybe internet access that we could get this information out to them, as they were a bit stressed during this time, and how to pay their taxes?
Teresa, was it in the focus?
So not all of them get the focus by mail. And I try to look on the website for how they could get that. I also try to look for those who had email access, how to get on to Nixie. But of course, I'm not, I know it from my cell phone, but didn't know how to help them there.
Diane, I'm more than happy to help them directly. If you want to either give them send me an email with their phone number, or give them my phone number. I'll be more than happy to, myself or any Betty.
So I get that, Teresa, and I appreciate that. Is there a way that I could direct my elderly neighbors to get the information that I get from Nixie? Is there another way that they could get that? Like, I don't even see it on the website. Like when I try to pull up the website and show them, I don't see my Nixie notifications on the website.
They're not, well, they're all directly, the information's all on the website. If you want to know how to pay your taxes, that's up there. But as far as everything that goes out on Nixle is not directly posted on the website.
Okay, so I was trying to just find a way that's better for my elderly neighbors. I'll keep with what I do if there's not a simplistic answer there.
What do you want to give them that you don't have?
Like, okay, so I have neighbors that have that are elderly, and they don't have any, not email, not text messages. So how are they supposed to know,
Ms. Mavora,
about the taxes? Even my neighbors who are on email, they don't get the notifications that they could drop their taxes at the office. So I'm just trying to guide my elderly neighbors in what I get from Nixle and what I get from notifications, which I don't even know which is which, if it's constant contacts. So I'm just trying to guide my elderly neighbors with the information I get. And how can they get it?
Mrs. Mavora,
Have them call Borough Hall.
Yeah.
or a family member can register through the website for Nixle, and they can get the information as well. We have it on Facebook, Constant Contact, the website, our newsletter, the front sign, and we have invited they can have their family members contact Betty Ann and she can help them get signed up, or they can do it themselves, just so that they're in the know of what's happening.
And then what does one of my elderly neighbors have to do if they want to get the Focus to their mailbox?
Contact Betty Ann and she'll add them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another question that I had, if you give me a second, because I'm losing my train of thought as text messages are coming in. I lost my train of thought, so I'm so sorry, but I might put my hand up in a minute if I remember it, someone else.
Yeah, Diane, I would say to your elderly neighbors, probably the best thing for them to do is either call the Borough Hall, or if they have the ability to walk to the Borough Hall. But
that's what I remember. I'm sorry, Ben. Hate to interrupt you. My train of thought. You just brought it back. I spoke to Chris about this. So one of my elderly neighbors, she reads a book a day, and her life was walking to the library and picking up a book and meeting her friends, and that's gone. So I was wondering if that free bookshelf that we have, if that could be put in the vestibule.
No.
Yeah, we addressed, I did raise this a meeting ago, Diane. I think that at the time, the protocol and the concern over shelter in place, but also the size of the bookshelf doesn't work in the vestibule, and then we can't put it outside in the elements.
But it's not in the element. You have an overhang right there.
But it's bolted to the wall. The bookshelf is bolted to the wall.
I have a screw gun. I'll come over if you don't mind. This is like, it's such a little thing that would make, and I'm sure it's just not it would make so many people happy. I mean, I have a screw gun.
Diane, I'm going to jump in here and just tell you right now that we are aware of protocols that the library has been setting out for the Monmouth County Library when it comes to not just having it available, but the handling of the books and whether or not, how long the virus can be transmitted in that environment.
Okay,
we're going to bring our librarians back in a fashion, and we're going to start to have them be able to have residents request books, and we're trying to put together some sort of drop off and pick up arrangement for those books. So we are working on that, and we're aware of that. And we know how important our library is, and I've been working with our library director, and we're following the cues of Monmouth County Library System, and they're really leading the way on what's appropriate protocol for library books, the transfer of library books in and out under COVID-19.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anything else, Dan?
No, everybody be safe and have fun in this introspective time.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public would like to be heard? Go to the borough. Tracy Cole again.
Okay.
One small housekeeping matter, Mr. Mayor. If there's a beautiful link in the weekly email we get for Zoom instructions, if we want to participate in the meeting, I was wondering, or I'll make a suggestion that the remote access URL link be part of that step-by-step guide. It's not, the URL link is not there. It's in the public notice, which is a great place for it as well, but it's not in the step-by-step guide. So I was just going to suggest that it be included there as well.
It's in the public notice that's also attached?
Correct. I was suggesting that it also be in the, it says remote, welcome to Fairhaven's remote access council meeting.
Right.
But it isn't there, but it could be.
Thank you. Anybody else, the public would like to be heard? Seeing no additional hands, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. Ask for a close to public comment. Go to the borough. We have a motion to close.
Motion.
All right. I appreciate everybody's comments. We will be going into executive session now. Action will not be taken. And everybody be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Everyone has to mute themselves and mute their video, please.
Okay, I don't see them. Videos are off.
You don't see their pictures, but they're on.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to close.
Second.
There we go. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good night. Wash your hands. Good night.